Information is knowledge, knowledge is understanding, and understanding is happiness. Preeminently. One person asks, individually to them, what are you doing? One says laying bricks. Okay, the second one says, I'm building a wall. And the third one says, I'm building a cathedral to God. And critical theory states that is the reason why we have famine, we have wars, we have stock market crashes, we have illnesses, and it is the complete destruction and problematic factor in which why people are where they are and why they're in the situation they're in. Mental illnesses is not normal. When you have these mental illnesses, it causes you to think in certain frameworks and have certain frameworks that cause you to believe and think in ways that are outside of the way normal people think. When it comes to good health, the absence of getting sick doesn't mean you have good health. It could mean that you're not around enough bacteria, viruses, or germs that is enough to affect your immune system. They don't care if the government goes bankrupt trying to do it because they don't like the government, okay? And they feel that overwhelmingly democratic people, left-leaning people feel that the government should do more to help people, even if it hurts the economy or it hurts the government. It's not a political discussion. This is a mental, psychological discussion that you're having with this person because they're disaffected. This person is actually not even ready to have a real conversation about politics. This person is a disaffected individual. All right, this is another episode of Verbal Artwork with Mr. Rembrandt. Of course, I'm Mr. Rembrandt, and this is the show, Verbal Artwork. And what we know is I've been away from a while, and I'm back now. And I've been working on something, and that's why I've been away for such a period of time. But I rest assured that what I've been working on is something of good quality, something big, and something to get people who feel some type of small connection, large connection, medium connection with me, or are just intrigued about the topic at hand. So by the time this episode comes out, okay, I will have released or have scheduled a copy of my new book. Okay, my new book is called Leftism, the Mental Illnesses of the Political Left. Okay, it's a political book. This is a copy of it, and this is a proof copy, and it'll be available immediately to purchase in paperback on Amazon.com, and there will be a Kindle version, as well as in the future, there will be an audio version for people to listen to. As well as in the future, I'm working out a deal with Barnes & Nobles for it to be on Barnes & Nobles as well. So it's a very comprehensive book. It has a multitude of studies. It also has some good graphics in here that are interesting, high quality. It has some information in here on where the data comes from, where the statistics come from, how to interpret it, good color art. There's the first chapter, not color, excuse me, black and white. And it's a comprehensive book. And today, me and Raw Wilkes, who is my guest today, who you guys, if you've tuned into the show before, have heard me and Raw Wilkes talk before. If you are new to this episode, welcome. And if you have listened to this show before, welcome back. And the same goes with Raw Wilkes, we're going to be talking about this book, The Mental Illnesses of the Political Left, Leftism. Without further ado, I just want to say welcome back, Raw Wilkes. This is going to be a good episode.
Sir.
And I've been locked into this for a while, working on this project, and I've been away from the internet a while, and as other influencers, YouTubers, people in the space, motivational speakers will know that when you are working on something, sometimes you have to get lost. And I had to get lost for a while in order to work on this, as many of the other projects and things that I'm working on. And you got lost for a while too, to work on what you're working on.
Absolutely.
But right now we're going to be talking about this book in this episode and many different things. And so even though I'm the host, a lot of the interviewing is going to be coming from you. And without further ado, Raw Wilkes, welcome back. And I'll let you start off with the questioning.
No doubt. So first and foremost, I want to go ahead and just give you a shout out. Obviously being able to write something and publish a book, which I don't know if a lot of people know, and you told me this, is like when it comes down to writing a book and actually getting it published, it's only 1%. Is that correct? It's like 1%, less than 1% or 1%
Yeah,
actually.
less than 1%. Yeah, because really quick, I believe 97% of people who write a book never get it published. And
Right.
out of the people who 97% of people who write a book never finish. And then out of the people who finish writing a book, only 20% of them actually publish it.
I see. Yeah. So right there, you're already in a small group of people. So when you gave me when we met up and you were telling me you were working on this big project and we met up and you were going to show me something and surprise, and you came up and showed me the book, the first thing that I thought about was like title of the book, where it's the mental illness of the political left, or the political left, leftism. I was like, wow, that's a pretty right off the bat, catchy title for a book. That's definitely going to grab some people's attention. What do you mean by mental illness of the political left? And of course we always talk about politics and different things. And I was thinking like the research and the work that I know you are that put together, that this book was probably going to be very, very informative.
Yeah.
So of course, my first thing is, obviously before we even got onto this podcast, was like, let me start skimming through it and reading it. And it was one thing I'll say is like, you never miss a beat, high quality is definitely your MO. The book was well put together, and it was a good I guess the first thing I would say was like, as I know you personally, it was like, what gave you the motivation to even want to put something like this together and publish a book about politics, more specifically the political left, and why you think this was important to even put a book like this together? What gave you the motivation to want to even write a book, which is, like you said, it's hard to do. It's 1%. And then to be able to publish the book, and the work that you did over some couple of years to be able to do the research and put all this together, what made you feel the need or inspired you to even want to put this book out for others to read and get the knowledge and information?
Yeah. So again, and thanks for that. You definitely have congratulated me on writing the book, and we've done that off camera, and we've celebrated a little bit for it as well. But now it's actually, we're just getting started on it, because now the work starts. But what made me want to write the book is, it goes without question that nowadays what's going on in our political environment is people are talking about politics more than ever before. And we can blame that to the Trump phenomenon. And I actually think it's a great thing. Some people will disagree because of the fact that they believe and see that there's a perceived high level of divisiveness. And I go into this into the introduction of the book. And it bothered me ever since 2017. I've been following politics ever since 2014. Because after I mastered the market, I felt started getting deep into other topics. In 2014, I started getting deep into politics, and lo and behold, one of the profound, notorious businessmen who I've had bought many books of his, read many books of his at the time, as well as other books on Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, rest in peace, Charlie Munger, pivotal person in my life. If you got a simple idea, take it serious. That's one of my favorite quotes I like about his. And I had a simple idea, and I took it serious. May he rest in peace. The one thing I noticed is I thought specifically that there was a turning point and a climax in my judgment of politics is what I thought that when you present facts, data, information, something that's true, something that's subjective, and a person can see it and you can let them know, you can convince and or change their mind, right? Because people want to believe facts, right? But what I noticed is that wasn't true at all. You know, um, people don't actually change their mind based upon facts. And they are very much influenced by a lot of different things that have nothing to do with facts, data, information. Now, when it comes to people like us, we're cognitive thinkers. We're very cognizant about what we think and how we attract things, and we're meticulous and we're methodical, and there's very limited dogmatic behaviors in how we approach things. But I noticed that and it bothered me. So then I started doing research 2016, 17 about like, well, what is the difference? Because there's clear differences that from the left and the right, that we're just different people. It has to be. So I started doing lots of researching, looking into demographics, first it was just demographics. And then that's when I saw basic things. And then I started writing in 2017, and I wrote for 6 months to 10 months. I was almost finished of a different version of this book. And it was just going to have historical connotations and some informative connotations. And that was going to be it. I put it aside. So in 2000, I was like, man, I should get back to that book. Different things happened. I didn't get back to it. But then 2022, I was like, that book I wanted to write, I really should finish it. And then that took me into a nose dive in a good way of diving into this subject on a deep basis, while also knowing a lot more differences esoterically from just being involved in podcasting, psychology, demographics. Pieces started coming together.
Cool.
So as pieces started coming together, I revamped what this book was about, and I revamped how I attacked it, and I revamped the subject, and it's more of what I wanted it to be now, in which when I started, it was an idea and I didn't know exactly what direction I wanted to go. I just put pen to paper. And again, now that the years have passed, I constructed this and I got something exactly what I wanted. I was going to name the title different, but doing so much obsessive research, this title fit more than the previous titles that I had summarized down to in a long list. So I think this is important because people want to know what are the differences between the left and the right. And it's very deep rooted. People want to know the why behind why the left believes what they believe, why the right believes what they believe. And what I found is there are more things questionable on one side, and there's some things questionable on the other, but there are drastic differences. And the book is written in a way that points out the drastic differences.
Yeah, so that's really good. It was good, really good. I mean, for well thought out, good summary of the whole thing. We could pretty much, honestly, let's dive into the book. So I noticed reading the book, you start off with pretty much the history of radical leftism, which is the first chapter. And you mentioned Karl Marx a lot in the book as a reference, which is, from my understanding, he's the one that was he was a journalist or a economist, a writer, and he came up with the theory, I guess, the Communist Manifesto that you mentioned in the book. Why is this inception, I guess, when you're using as a history of the radical left and you're giving the history, why does it start with him and not, why does it start with him as far as the radical left? And why is Karl Marx the first person, Marx, it's the first person that you kind of start the history of that that ideology?
Yeah, so the reason of that is um it's the same way I would approach anything or any argument or any debate or any information that I'm trying to provide to somebody. If I have a little bit of time to explain, is going into the historical facts about a particular thing first before you can answer more of the whys. If you don't understand the foundation and understand where this actually came from, then it could pose a difficult factor for an individual not to understand the whole ramifications of it all. So also what I noticed is when you really see a lot of the historical things, those historical things paint pictures into why things are the way they are now. And across the timeline, the behaviors, ideologies, psychology, forms of thinking, behaviors, heritability, and all sorts of data and science that are related to the two seem to be correlated from past and present. So when you look at on a spectrum, left-leaning aspects, you have moderate left-leaning people, you have more in it from right to left. You have moderate, you have mild, you have more progressive, you have radical ones. So historically, I started with the radical ones to see where that got me, and it laid the foundation down to what's important in the book. So you see, to get into it a little bit, what you see is Karl Marx had a very tough upbringing.
Right.
His father was involved in politics. His father had some slightly radical behaviors, which Karl Marx witnessed and was affected by. Karl Marx also in school had his principal who was engaging in some type of political events that caused a spillover into the school dichotomy that Karl remembers impactfully. And when Karl went into university, he got into left-leaning groups, radicalized groups, political groups specifically. And that type of ideology that he had and or behavior continued all the way throughout his life. And he believed that writing his beliefs, specifically on communism and socialism, he wrote the book that I call in my book, I call it the Bible of Leftism, which is the Communist Manifesto, which has a lot of ideologies that left-leaning people still have to this day. People who believe in socialism, communism, or progressive-based ideologies. So that's why I call it that, because intrinsically, so much information can be found in that book. And a lot of people remember this book historically as a manuscript of communism and socialism beliefs.
Right. And for the record, Karl Marx, for the record, never seen this come to fruition. This is a theory. He's never seen Marxism actually exist and be able to actually see if it's successful or not when he was actually putting this together. And the idea, he actually never saw it actually being used in an actual country or state and being able to see if it operates in the way that would actually have a good outcome.
Yeah, so he was very ambitious on getting the message out on a socialistic society, which is a society that is supposed to end up being communism in the end. Hence the book, The Communist Manifesto. Yeah, I would say that over the years of after he passed, is what his writings have become the most impactful in our society. specifically. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it's funny because I wanted to add a point just to talk about just his ideology in general. So, from my understanding, he basically did not believe in capitalism and believed that it was a system that pretty much alienates its people and that the workers don't have control over their goods and what they produce in the market.
Yeah.
And that basically capitalists, which are basically your elitists, are basically controlling everybody at the bottom, and that they don't have they don't basically have any freedoms or any rights to their work. So it's funny because, in my opinion, fast forward till now, there was something that I thought about not too long ago, yesterday actually, and I was thinking, I was like, okay, so we're looking at conglomerates or companies. We're looking at business because we'll talk about America, and we're talking about business, and 99% of all incorporated businesses are small businesses, according to the Small Business Administration statistics. And then I looked at that and I said, okay, all right. So when it comes to business, most of it's small. And they said the Small Business Administration accounts for 43 to 44% of GDP in America. And it employs over half of Americans. In that statistic, it said within the first 5 years, 50% of small businesses fell. And in 10 years, it's like 65%. So to say that capitalistic people pretty much have this proclivity that they basically control and everything, they fail. So they fail and they get replaced by other business because the point of capitalism is to continue to innovate, advance, and continue to produce goods for the consumers. And if you don't, you fail typically. And then I looked into it even more. I said, let me look at the S&P 500. So the S&P 500, for everybody that don't know, is the Standards and Poor 500, the stock market, are the top 500 companies in America by market cap, correct?
Yes.
So I looked at that and I said, so these are the biggest companies. Looked into that. In 2003 till now, there's 52% of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 in 2003, 52% of them don't even exist today. These are the top 500 companies in America. And if you go back later than that, there's even a higher percentage. So again, this whole proclivity that, big corporations have this control over the people, where they're failing, and the top 500 companies in America are failing, and they get replaced by the bigger companies that innovate or competitive edges, or get lazy in the market and don't want to worry about competition or innovations or producing things that can be more beneficial for the consumer. So it's weird that he had this idea that now he didn't get to see it, but we see companies go in and out of the S&P 500 all the time, fail and never come around. I can name a couple right at the top: Toys R Us, Blockbuster, Polaroids, the camera company. I won't even say Canon. Might even no Kodak, the film company, Kodak. They're out of business. So it's weird though. It's weird to again, just the ideology of them hating that. Do you understand that point? That's that point of people having this hatred towards capitalism when capitalism fails at times. Like big companies fail.
Yeah. I mean, and that while that could explain a lot in itself, that argument we understand very well.
Right.
And that argument by itself, it's funny, and we're talking about things that are funny, would never influence a left-leaning person at all within a conversation on the impacts of capitalism and the need for why it's better than a socialist or communist society. That would actually do nothing. That wouldn't even touch 1%. Because that factor, that economic factor also, which is in the book explicitly in a small amount, where I talk about the psychology of economics and I talk about the fundamentals of economics from an understandable perspective, so you can understand the exact concepts that you're making. And it is definitely, I would explicitly say, the average, more progressive left-leaning person is not even going to know that data that you just explained.
Right.
And even if you do explain that particular data, it's not going to influence them that at all. They're just going to say, well, that doesn't matter. It's still dominated by corporations. So
Right.
yeah, but what you're explaining, just to add a little bit onto that, is that
Right.
when it comes to capitalism or companies, right? Companies
Mhm.
float in and out of large cap, medium cap, small cap. It's a competitive business. One year you're hot, one year you're not. One year
Mhm.
you're in business doing well. One year you've lost your business. One day you're worth $50 billion in equity, obviously, not cash, like some people don't understand. And
Mhm.
then the next moment you're worth one billion or something dramatic through
Right.
all it takes is another pandemic for a situation like that to happen. Yeah, that I agree with, but that wouldn't change none of their minds because
Yeah.
again, it's much, much, much more deeper than that, which we're
Yeah.
going to get
And you
into.
gave a simple, you gave in your book a simple concept of like how a socialist ideal would work when you came down to school. And you said you gave an example of a teacher was doing an experiment with their students, and they basically conducted a test.
Yes.
It took a test, and in the first test, it was basically everybody, took the test, and after the test was done, it was considered like we're going to go ahead and give the score of the average. So if you scored an A, and somebody else maybe didn't score an A, they scored an F. Well, after they averaged everybody out, the average score for the entire class was a B. So if you were an A, you came down to a B, but if you failed that test, you came up to a B. So then then they did a second test with the same exact students. So the students that apparently scored an A the first time slacked off, didn't study as much, didn't do as well the second time. So when they did the cumulative average the second time, it dropped down to what I think it was a D, correct? A D
Yes.
in the test. And then after the third time, it just basically the people that were already failing were already doing even less than what they did the first two times. And then the people that were actually smart and actually were taking it serious did not take it serious at all. And they were saying that in your nutshell is pretty much
Yeah. Yeah.
in a
So
simplistic way.
yes, in a simplistic way. So, uh, disclaimer: there are some individuals going around on the internet who are familiar with that study, saying that it may or may not be true. From what I've seen, from the research I've done, that teacher in school of the person that was named does exist, and so does the profile exist. And so it's not based upon a pseudo school or person. And some people say, well, that experiment is just pseudo. We don't know for sure, but it was a very, very viral during the time um, article, you might say, that went around of this teacher who did this experiment. And whether it's true or not, which I believe it is, and even if it's not true, I argue this in the book. If any teacher, if that didn't happen, quote unquote, air quotes, we gave a teacher to actually do this, which I dare any teacher who thinks socialism is good to try it, or any teacher who just wants to try an experiment to do it. And I would guarantee that the result would be the same. Because that is actually how socialism societies across the world have resulted in that exact way. Same thing with Venezuela, super powerhouse country, rich with oil, and put in Chavez first as the socialist leader who, by in fact, idolized Karl Marx from a kid. His readings, the Communist Manifesto, very much influenced by Karl Marx. When he became president, he led the country just like a socialist country, because that's what he believed in. He also had affiliations with Russia during the time. He classified himself as a socialist and a Marxist and sometimes a communist. And the country did well for a short period of time until it did not anymore. And now Venezuela is used as one of the models of a wealthy country that failed.
So let's talk about, like, honestly, let's just talk about the mental illness now, because really the book is more geared towards leftism, mental illness. What are some of the mental illness aspects of somebody that is left leaning?
Okay.
When you say that mental illness of the left, what are we talking about? Like, how can somebody, a layman person, understand what that means?
Okay. So I will say this. Okay. Just like this disclaimer that I gave in the beginning of the book, the preface, you know, these are facts, these are data. These are facts and data by scientists, psychologists, data that's been around for a while, a long time. A lot of people already know about it. And I'm reporting the data, and I've written about it, and I put it in a comprehensive book. But to go over the differences psychologically, which we're about to, I'm going to explain, and then I'm going to explain why it's important. Okay, so first off, when it comes to left-leaning and right-leaning people overwhelmingly, by a rate of 2 to 3 times, have psychological mental illnesses at a rate of 2 to 3 times higher than that of people on the right. Okay, they have a lot more mental illness compared to compared to right-leaning people. And this is not only psychological distress results such as anxiety, depression, but also deeper aspects like anorexia, bulimia, PTSD, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, ADHD. They have mental and psychological issues at a rate of 2 to 3 times higher than that of the right. They also, to add into that, also have, according to the data, physical health that is worse than that of people on the right. Okay? And it depends how deep you want to go into that. That is the basis of what we're talking about. And the rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than that.
So why does that correlate? How does that correlate with an ideology?
Yeah, good. So there are many ways and reasons on why that correlates with an ideology. One of the aspects is self-victimization and senses of feelings of worthlessness that are correlated with specifically psychological distress, which psychological stress is the fundamental aspect that's correlated with psychological mental illnesses. Okay, so one of the problems is, which we'll get into, is that psychological illnesses, okay, neuroses, are directly correlated with aspects that cause a person to have cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions are cognitive errors that a person has when it comes to their way of thinking that is the result of or directly correlated from psychological mental illnesses. Okay, so a person, we agree, a person who's depressed or anxious or suffering from psychological mental illnesses is not normal. Okay, there is some data about how a large group of women actually believe depression is normal because women deal with psychological distress at very high numbers. We'll get into that a little bit later. But no, mental illnesses is not normal. People need to seek help. People need to get that taken care of. Okay, it's not normal. And when you have these mental illnesses, it causes you to think in certain frameworks and have certain frameworks that cause you to believe and think in ways that are outside of the way normal people think. Okay, So if you are 2 to 3 times more likely, group A versus group B, in a difference in mental health, we're going to see drastically different perspective, viewpoints, and ideologies amongst group A than group B. Okay. And with the understanding of cognitive distortions, we understand that mental illnesses cause a whole litany of problems psychologically that cause a person to think in different ways. And I could even get deeper into the studies, but to keep it more basic, we'll come back to the studies around cognitive distortions and how it directly correlates with political orientation. But more so why I talked about self-victimization and worthlessness. So why is that important? Just to dive briefly into that, when it comes to self-victimization, for example, it's very much correlated to left-leaning ideology, specifically in the fact that a lot of Marxism, we're getting back into Karl Marx, is rooted in an aspect called critical theory. Okay, critical theory is a philosophical perspective that understands that societies are rooted in some type of foundational element that causes an oppressor and oppressed narrative. Okay, and that factor can be rooted around different things. Okay, you can have critical race theory, which is critical theory wrapped around race. You can have, they even have one of genderqueer theory, for example, that I don't know too much about, but that's wrapped around the oppressive nature of between straight and people of that community in a power dynamic way. It describes to explain that. And Marxism, which is garnered after Karl Marx, is the explanation that society is a power and oppressor struggle dichotomy. Critical theory, the foundation of critical theory, is rooted in conflict theory. What is conflict theory? Conflict theory is the rooted element that I just explained, that society is rooted on powerful versus powerless, oppressor versus the oppressed. And critical theory states that this dichotomy is the reason why we have famine, we have wars, we have stock market crashes, we have illnesses, and it is the complete destruction and problematic factor in which why people are where they are and why they're in the situation they're in. It is the over-encompassing omnipotent factor on how we can describe everything. Okay, so why is this important to self-victimization? Because that is the fundamental aspect on what a person who is engaging in self-victimization and or worthlessness beliefs thinks. Okay, to believe society's binary, rich, poor, successful, unsuccessful, power, powerless, these binary factors. People who engage in self-victimization believe these same exact things. People who have senses of worthlessness feel the same exact thing. One of the 4 elements of self-victimization, okay, it's manipulation, it's attention seeking, and it's deflection. So you self-victimize to manipulate people to believe what you want them to believe as a coping mechanism. They're all coping mechanisms. You engage in attention seeking because you need attention. It is a predecessor of psychological distress. Okay? People who need attention, who seek attention, who feel like they want attention, these are all garnered as cluster B symptoms. Okay? People who have borderline personality disorders, which is a cluster B illness, they need attention. People with histrionic personality disorder, which is a cluster B disorder, they feel like people are trying to abandon them, or vice versa. Those two are very similar except that aspect. One feels abandoned, one needs more attention. The histrionic needs attention. The borderline feels as if they're abandoned. These are cluster B. Okay. Attention seeking. right? Manipulation, attention seeking, and deflection, okay? It's not their fault. It's everything else's fault, okay? I'm powerless. They're powerful. I can't succeed. They are the succeeders, okay? Deflection, low senses of accountability. They're all coping mechanisms wrapped around psychological distress and or mental illnesses, okay? Another fact that ties a lot of this together, when it comes to conservatives, that they've done studies on this, conservatives have very high forms of self-responsibility, okay? People who have high forms of self-responsibility do not engage in self-victimization, okay? Conservatives have very high forms of self-responsibility. People who are highly conscientious, which we'll go into, big 5 personality traits. We'll go into that later on. I'm pretty sure you have that written down. Okay. Conservatives are higher conscientiousness. People who are higher conscientiousness have higher forms of self-responsibility. People who have high forms of self-responsibility have low to no self-victimization. Okay. People with psychological distress, mental illnesses, mental disorders have high forms of self-victimization. Okay. People with depression, I talked about worthlessness as a wrapped around factor of self-victimization. Worthlessness is the number one symptom correlated with depression. Okay? Left-leaning people have depression at rates that are 2 to 3 times higher than that of conservatives. Okay? The number one symptom of depression is a sense of worthlessness. Okay, by clinical data, clinical research. Okay, as we can see, there are cognitive distortions, which are incorrect frameworks that left-leaning people have as a result of mental illness at high rates. They are self-victimization habits, coping mechanisms that are directly correlated with mental illness that's predominant on the left. Senses of worthlessness that the left-leaning people have, which is the number one symptom of depression that's correlated with people on the left. Okay, 2 more factors about self-victimization, and then I'll let you ask more questions so we can dive deep into this. These are very complex data points. This is a complex book, but it's an easy read book, and this is why people need to go out and get this book. We're not even going to cover all the things in this book. There's over 300, 400, 500 different cited sources in here. Okay. So when it came to self-victimization, for example, Jonathan Haidt, world-renowned, probably world-renowned, but American-renowned friend of Jordan Peterson and psychologist, done lots of work on the differences between left-leaning people, right-leaning people, okay? And what he found is when it comes to specifically data that he did on social media with young girls, he found that obviously young girls, women in general, are more left-leaning than men. Young girls are incredibly more left-leaning than the average person, okay? And specifically when it came to mental illness, young girls, which is already a high risk category, had tremendous amounts of self-victimization, demoralization, and climate alarmism that they felt as a result of being hyper-focused with left-leaning proclivities, okay? So even his studies have shown high forms of self-victimization on demographics of people specifically on the left, okay? Studies have shown, for example, people with high self-victimization, they have a lot of other psychological comorbidities, other psychological illnesses, okay? Like I explained, people on the left have mental illness at a rate 2 to 3 times higher than that of people on the right. Okay, so the comorbidities situation is not unusual, right? They did a study on systematic victimhood, right? We're talking about victimization, another study. And they showed that on the study, they did this during Trump's presidency, people who were conservative and highly likely to vote for Trump versus people who were left-leaning and highly likely not to vote for Trump, what they found is people who were left-leaning and highly likely not to vote for Trump scored 8 out of 8 on feelings and positive results of self-victimization, 8 different categories. Okay, so this is not a phenomenon that I'm just attaching this to the left. There has been overwhelming data, correlated factors, nomological information to attach the phenomenon of self-victimization, not only mental illness, senses of worthlessness, and cognitive distortions. Just there's a small framework that I'm giving to you that is correlated highly with the left. Wilkes?
Right. So to add to that, as far as another question would be, there's a graph that you have in the book that shows that the more a person or not an individual, as far as groups now, we're talking about groups that suffer from forms of mental illness, the more they lean left as far as ideology. Why is it that, why do you say people that suffer from various mental illnesses want to vote left, which is pretty much support of social injustices, social equality, welfare system? Why are they more prone to want to support those types of ideologies and policies? Suffering from mental illness, why is that more favored for people that have mental illnesses and self-worthlessness and victimization? And why do you think those individuals cling to that type of?
Yeah, so that's a good point. That's a good question. So one of the reasons is why is I'm going through a lot of different reasons. It's going to be nomological. So the graph specifically that you're talking about, and there's a few graphs in there that show that the more left-leaning a person is, from moderate to radical left-leaning, the higher percentage of mental illness that's correlated with their left-leaning proclivity as they go further left. And meanwhile, to add some context, when it comes to people on the right, when we look at moderate conservatives and then we look at radical right-leaning people, actually, not only was mental illness pretty low comparatively, mental illness actually went down as the further you went right. And on a very small, and it was mostly a sideways based graph from the different levels of right-leaning proclivity, but as you went further right, it actually went slightly down. So they had less mental illness the further you went right. With left-leaning people, the further you go left, it's exponential, it's hockey stick. And what some of the reasons why, we'll go over some of the reasons why. Well, I just explained that they have low self-responsibility, for example, okay? This was not only shown in the conscientious aspect, which I went over, but they'd done studies on the subjective well-being study, which the second test showed that under subjective well-being, they saw that, under the system justification theory, the second study that they did showed conservatives had overwhelming higher forms of subjective well-being. Okay, so this is psychological health, happiness about their life, overall feeling better and being happier and being better in their life. Okay, and then it showed that was correlated highly with self-responsibility. There's a self-responsibility there again. Then it also showed that they believed in meritocracy at a high rate. And that study specifically showed that the the understanding and the acknowledgement of meritocracy as a phenomenon allowed more happiness as a palliative function for these people. So specifically, people on the left did not have good correlations with meritocracy. They did not like the factor of you get out of life what you put in.
Right.
Okay? They could not rationalize meritocracy in a healthy way. Meanwhile, conservatives would under the subjective well-being study that showed that they had high self-responsibility, high forms of tolerance and rationality as a palliative function psychologically, because they had good psychological health to deal with meritocracy, while left-leaning people did not. Okay? A left-leaning person, they work hard, they try to do well at something, they don't get the result they have, they go into a neurotic state of worthlessness, self-victimization, and negative and bad feelings at higher rates than people on the right. Okay? They do not feel as if merit-based societies work. They don't like merit-based societies, and they believe merit-based societies are not fair. So when you have left-leaning policies versus right-leaning policies are more geared towards those phenomenons that you will make things in society based upon you get what you reap what you sow. Left-leaning policies are a little bit more social programs and more so about giving. And a lot of left-leaning people, the data has shown, believe that that the government should do more for the people, even if it destroys or hurts the economy. And they should do more as giving money, giving more programs, and doing more for the individual person. Left-leaning people overwhelmingly hate rich people. They overwhelmingly dislike billionaires. And they overwhelmingly believe that people who are successful are not smart. People who are successful cheat. And people who are successful are greedy. While people who are not successful are more hardworking. They're more honest. And they are more likely to be fair and not greedy. And with those aspects, you have different frameworks of thinking that are completely on opposite spectrums. And the left also adds that narrative that you are not where you are because of your fault. You are where you're at because of systemic problems. And the way that we can fix these things is give you programs. And the left, like even Jonathan Haidt has said, the left has always been anti-capitalist. So if you're anti-capitalist, you're overwhelmingly, in a way, anti-success. And if you're overwhelmingly anti-success, by default, it's going to be hard for you to be successful because you are despising something that you could potentially be. So those are anomalogical of answers that explain your answer in different ways. And as the conversation goes on, there's going to be a lot more things that I'm going to bring in that is going to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So like also we talked about when it comes down to left-leaning politics, you talked about tribalism and that certain left-leaning people are tribal. You also mentioned about the African-American community and the percentage that they vote typically left, which was in the high of 90%.
Correct.
So 90%, we'll just say 90% of the African-American community.
Even though I'll add that this election, it doesn't appear that the first
probably
time
not.
in a long time, it won't be that way. But yes, historically, it's unchanged. Yes.
Yes. So you touched a little bit about that data and we'll just say the African-American community, why are they tribal and why is tribalistic? Them being tribalistic accounts for them voting 90% Democratic historically. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, good point. So good question. So historically, before the 60s, there was more of a balance of conservatives and left-leaning people as far as the minority community. And that changed with the policy of Lyndon B. Johnson, which was the war on poverty that was done, Civil Rights Act. Was during that period. Feminism was on the rise, and the dramatic increase in welfare as a phenomenon, which overwhelmingly exploded into minority neighborhoods. This caused a dramatic shift in how minorities voted. And because it was left-leaning policies that put a lot of these things in play, a lot of them were mostly partisan, were not just impartial. Some of it was impartial, some of it was partial to that of the right. So when it comes to tribalism, when they've done studies of different races, for example, and how their race plays a large portion into their identity as an individual, what they showed is out of the major 4 races in America, for example, we'll just talk about that. Black, specifically minorities, of them, almost 80% of them felt that their identity as a Black person was pivotal to who they were as a person. So, and that by itself is neither bad or good, but what happens as a result of that is you now assign specifically towards a depiction of Black versus white. You're now seeing things kind of binary to where now it's back to this critical theory, conflict theory based ideology where, okay, you're talking too eloquently, you're not Black. You're not dressing a certain way, you're not Black. And even a study had showed it when you put minorities near each other, specifically the study was done when Obama was president, that when another minority knew, even if they were more right-leaning or considering voting right-leaning, was around other minorities, when they knew that minority had a high chance of voting for the Democrat at the time, they were more likely to vote for a Democrat. Meanwhile, when it was the other way around, it had no influence. So I also went into some data historically not historically, but a data on a book that actually wrote a lot about this. And as we know, that when it comes to minority, there are just many things that if you don't do, you're considered all of these pejoratives or isms, right? You're Uncle Tom, you're this and that. Larry Elder understands this dramatically because he's been called a lot of names. Jesse Lee Peterson, okay, not Jordan Peterson. Jesse Lee Peterson, okay, has been given Kuhn Awards for his comments about, how the minority faction is nowadays. Candace Owens talks a lot about it. Shout out to her. But yeah, there's just a lot of factors in which minorities, Black people feel that you have to do things this way or you are not part of the group. And that's a tribal mentality. And when it comes to the statistics of tribal mentality, is if you do things outside the group, you are met with malevolent and aggressive behavior from inward group members because they have a sense that you're becoming an outward group member and you are not doing things that benefit the tribe. And people who have race-based and other, but specifically race-based, identity-based thinking, that comes with how they are as a person, the tribalism aspect. And Rain has talked a lot about tribalism. I had some other data in there talking about tribalism, this collectivist perspective. And that is what occurs as a result of that. And there's a lot of that on when it comes to Black people. And again, it is insinuated by the data that I showed in the references that I have in that particular section that if you don't, it's your duty as a minority to vote for Democrats. And if you don't, as Joe Biden has famously said, and this is why he said it to Charlemagne, if you don't vote for me, then you ain't Black, Jack.
Yep.
And because
For that.
that is the trope that minorities say
That's the
to
trope.
other minorities, to each other, that if you don't vote for a Democrat, then you ain't Black. And how wrong is that? That's terrible.
Oh, it's horrible. Horrible to be said at that level. There's definitely a lot of pandering there, especially when he even did an interview with Cardi B. But no, that was very good. That was very good. Give a lot of perspective, a lot of information there, because it's sometimes, like you said, like when we have conversations with others in general in public settings about politics, and you mentioned this in the book about you can have a conversation about money or business, money, finance, and we could talk about something simple as, hey, if you buy, get an FHA, you qualify for a loan, get an FHA loan, 3.5% down, you can buy up to 4 units, and it's considered a personal primary residence. And you can use that as the leverage to be able to you set yourself up into investment without absolutely having to put 20% down and buy an investment property, something simple. And you can show that to an individual and they'll take it for what it is and go, thanks for that information. And even you spit in the book about even with investments, you can open up an account, put an initial investment of $3,000, and then you can put $100 a month, up to $1,200 a year, and you get a cumulative return of 12% over 40 years. You're looking at over $1 million. If you put that in the book and you can show that to somebody will go, I'm not going to argue that or refute that based on the fact that you can look at historical returns in the stock market over the last 100 years and see that the market does over time, long-term buy and hold, which is the truest form of building wealth, is long buy and hold. You can show that and no one will argue it. But then, like you said, if you actually have something that comes down to politics, and the person is a deeply, like you said, identity-based politics and all these information that you have in the book, it's explains what you are explaining in this book is why, when you do have these conversations with people, you show facts, stats, and data, that they cannot get over the fact that when it comes to their personal beliefs involved into a certain ideology, they cannot sway left or right, period. And then the argument or the conversation usually goes nowhere. And I will say, reading the book, it definitely gives a lot of clarity to that. And I want, and I want you to kind of add to that is like why, even though that you're probably not going to change a person's mind, that this book is going to help you be able to navigate these individuals and be able to have a conversation with them and not maybe like, what's the ultimate goal, I guess is what I'm trying to ask. Like the ultimate goal with that scenario I just said, what is the ultimate goal of somebody reading this book and being able to talk to an individual that when it gets down to political discussion, no matter how transparent or factual you are, they don't want to hear the information or be able to take it for what it is. And why is that important in conversations going forward? After a person gets formed and understands all the aspects of leftism, what's the ultimate goal?
Yeah, so good point. So good question. So I have made the argument that when you sit down and have a conversation with somebody, and you're at opposite ends of the spectrum politically, that on the topic at hand, whatever policy-based topic at hand or subject matter you're talking about, facts and data and information is not enough typically to change their mind. And typically, on a lot of subjects, you're not going to change a person's mind very easily based on data and facts alone. It takes a certain type of person. But I don't think all is lost. I do believe that understanding is happiness.
Mm.
And while some people will say, well, when you don't know you don't need to understand things to be happy, because some people are happy without knowing things. Some people are happy without knowing. And that is true, but not true, because while ignorant is bliss, happiness in ignorance is not true happiness. Happiness is knowing what the truth is. And if you know the truth, you can actually feel intrinsically about it the way that is necessary. And that is the happiness, right? When I talk about what is happiness, for example, to get a little bit philosophical, and I'm going to come back and tie it all in. When it comes to good health, the absence of getting sick doesn't mean you have good health. It could mean that you're not around enough bacteria, viruses, or germs that is enough to affect your immune system. What is prevalent is somebody who gets sick, I wouldn't say often, but has gotten sick more than the average person. They're going to have more antibody in their body to fight off viruses and or other infections at a higher rate than somebody who has not. So the absence of getting sick doesn't mean strong health, nor does the absence of difficulties or upsetness or even sometimes sadness means that you have the best and happiest life. It also means you have a privileged life. The having the proper balance is the key, is the yin, is the yang. So being able to, you can't win a boxing match, although it happens sometimes, without getting hit. Okay? The fact that you're able to roll with the punches and deliver the punches back allows you to win the match. There is no throwing punches and not getting hit. Okay? And when it comes to this particular dichotomy of why is this important, is because this level of in-depthness that I'm explaining to people, I believe will help people understand each other more and navigate in a way with each other that will allow them to understand not only where they're coming from, but be able to make decisions more effectively instead of wondering and or dismissing each other as a result. Now, some dismissing can occur as a result of this, but one thing for sure is, if I'm sitting down with somebody and we have nuanced opinions on things, we could probably come to an agreement politically. If I'm mostly moderate and this person is just way out in the weeds with radicalized perspectives, I know that there's something there going on with them that is not actually prevalent of normalized political perspectives, but they have another faction going on with them that doesn't really even actually need for us to have a political conversation. Okay, here's another example. Through my work, which I have a small bio on the back of my book, which talks about how, I've aided in numerous individuals who've been disaffected in the public sector. Okay, so I have experience dealing with a lot of mental health individuals. And one particular young lady I was dealing with, specifically, I could see by dealing with her, she had severe manic depressive disorder. And by dealing with this person, I was able to deal with them in a way that allowed them to get what they needed, because I understood. I understood.
Because you understood.
So I was able to navigate how to deal with them. If I didn't understand them, what they were going through, nothing about their being able to see an abstraction, their mental illness due to my cognitive awareness, then I could have easily been offended by what they were saying or how they were acting, because they were acting in a dramatic way that typically people do not act at all. And I was so aware of how this individual was acting that I was able to ask this person, well, what kind of, are you on your medication? Do you think you need that? And, while this person was screaming, said, yeah, I haven't had it, and I've explained, well, okay, is maybe is lithium something that you might take? And they said, this person came to tears. I'll never forget when I said that. They said, oh God, yes, I wish I had that. I need that. Okay, lithium's a very strong psychological medication for people who have severe manic depression and or schizophrenia. Okay, so this changed the whole dichotomy of the situation once that person knew that I understood them. It didn't even matter what we were talking about anymore in that situation. They had a trust in me and they could understand me. So how does this, I'm going to now explain how this relates to politics, and I'll let you reflect and ask another question, Wilkes. If somebody is saying to you that they just need to make, and I'm giving you an example, it doesn't have to be everyone's example or everyone reasons why. They just need to make university tuition free. Okay, well, what if this hurts the economy? Well, I don't care if it hurts the economy. The government needs to do more. And they just need to make it free. Well, why is that? Yeah, well, because,
Right.
look at life. What else am I going to do? I can't do anything else. Life is too hard. Look at all of these rich people who are taking over everything, who own everything. I'm just trying to survive. I just want to get a good education, and the government needs to pay for it. And if they don't pay for it, they're just helping rich people get richer, and they're not helping the poor. So what this person is explaining actually has nothing to do with politics. This person has a level of worthlessness because they feel like life is too hard, that they can't get where they want to get in life, that they can't do what they want to do. It's a young person, obviously. Okay. They feel like tuition should be free because they feel like they can't afford it. Okay. And they don't care if the government goes bankrupt trying to do it because they don't like the government. Okay. And they feel that overwhelmingly Democratic people, left-leaning people feel that the government should do more to help people, even if it hurts the economy or it hurts the government. So this person has a lot of further left-leaning perspectives that is rooted in the mental and psychological state that they are in as an individual. It's not a political discussion. This is a mental, psychological discussion that you're having with this person because they're disaffected. This person is actually not even ready to have a real conversation about politics. This person is a disaffected individual. And then as you understanding that, then you know how to navigate with this person. Let's not even talk about politics. Let's talk about something else. Or maybe you can talk about politics, but now you know how to approach it. Understanding is happiness. And now that you know that, you'll feel better communicating with this person, and you won't be as upset when they get malevolent with you, tribal with you, when they lash out at you for having a different opinion. Wilkes?
Yeah, very good. Well said. You talked about earlier in the conversation that you were double back around when it comes down to the personality. What's interesting with personality is besides just having your own belief system, you're saying that in the book that also just almost a natural phenomenon, your personality is almost can correlate to almost to what side that you're going to lean to as far as the data that shows. And I know just a reference, Jordan Peterson, when it comes down to 5 personality traits, and he says this all the time when it comes down to it, conscientiousness, which is one of the traits, conscientiousness and being disagreeable is a huge personality trait that correlates to success in the workforce.
Yes.
And there's a lot of data that shows that to be true. So using that, you're saying that with the 5 personality traits, which is openness, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism, and conscientiousness, that all these personality traits broken down, we can see where a person probably can vote left or right based on those traits alone. Can you explain how that's possible?
Yes. So the big 5 personality traits, which there are many other personality-based tests, which actually Jordan Peterson doesn't like, but I find it to be okay. He likes the big 5 only, and the big 5 is the most important one. I will agree with that. And he also likes IQ tests, and I believe that there's other cognitive testing that could explain more results on individual performance. He kind of disagrees, but that's another conversation. I've actually debated him personally on this particular topic, but that's neither here nor there. And I actually referenced him many times in the book, and specifically a big 5 personality traits, because he has done a lot of research on that particular aspect, and it's cited. And he has a high index in relation to his research that he's done. And his high index, which is his cited work on the influence of society, is actually up there with Einstein, which people don't even understand. I do, because I've looked into it. And he's been a mentor from afar to me, as well as Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger. Rest in peace, Charlie Munger. And so I'll just lay that out there. So when it comes to big 5, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, yeah, you can actually sum it up in 2 different combinations and actually be just about exact on what type of person you're going to get. So you gave the argument that a highly conscientious person who's not agreeable, which is highly correlated with success in the work field, whether man or woman, is highly associated with people who are conservative. People who are, for example, have high openness and who are highly agreeable are people who almost undoubtedly will be left-leaning. Also, people with high openness and high neuroticism will also be correlated with people with the left. So just to break it down, when it comes to openness, for example, openness is highly correlated with people on the left. You know, openness is usually a personality trait associated with creativity. And this is why Silicon Valley, they're mostly left-leaning people. They're very creative. They're highly creative individuals. People in Hollywood have high openness. They're actors, they're filmmakers. Comedians are typically left-leaning, have high openness. People on TV, teachers who have high openness. Well, women in general typically are more left-leaning and have higher openness than men. All those associations are correlated. Also, people with high openness also have different aspects, which I lay out in the book specifically. People with high openness also have some different aspects in proclivity, which they're actually more impulsive, have higher forms of self-expression. They're actually less practical. Okay, people who are less practical, as you understand the work of Daniel Kahneman, is associated with lower cognitive aptitudes. They have less emotional control. And obviously, because of that, they also show somewhat lower cognitive abilities, because people with disinhibition, an inability to control their emotions, along with less practicality, which people with openness have, is associated with lower forms of cognitive ability, essentially. Now, there's no study from what I can see that directly has done a study showing that left-leaning people have lower IQs than people on the right. So I'm not saying that, but on cognitive aptitude tests, there are differences that I've showed explicitly. So conscientiousness, people on the right have higher conscientiousness compared to left-leaning people. This is highly correlated with success and results and work attitude and work environment and work-related aspects. People with extroversion, conservatives are more extroverted than people on the left, okay? People on the left are more introverted. The life of the party is typically going to be a conservative. Even though when it comes to politics, left-leaning people are more apt to talk about politics than right-leaning people. To me, that's a proclivity of openness and disinhibition, but nevertheless. What is the other one? Extroversion, conscientious, openness, conscientious, extroversion.
Agreeableness.
Agreeableness. Non-agreeableness is associated with particularly CEOs and highly successful people with high success. Agreeableness is actually a trait that is associated with being a better worker. Not a highly successful one, but in general, being a good worker, taking direction, being a secretary, answering phones, communicating. And typically women are more agreeable than men. And typically women are more left-leaning than men. Okay. And, so agreeableness is correlated with people on the left. And then neuroticism. Neuroticism is a personality trait, not to be confused with the word neurosis, which they are correlated. Neurosis is the proclivity to mental illness. Neuroticism is the proclivity for negative emotion, which is correlated with people on the left. So not only do people with the left have higher forms of psychological mental illnesses and neuroses and cognitive distortions, and they also, as a proclivity, have a personality-based trait of neuroticism at a higher rate than people on the right. Whoops.
So question with that, how does, you mentioned the book, when it comes to those 5 personality traits, the one that's concentrated, the 2 concentrated the most for left-leaning ideology or liberals in general is openness and neuroticism. So with those 2 personality traits, how does those 2 personality traits correlate when it comes to making policies? So if you have high openness, you obviously, like you said, your curiosity, you have great imagination, you have the enjoyment of abstract thinking on ideas and progressiveness and, towards things, and then you're like very drawn towards personal emotions. And then you got, like you said, neuroticism, the tendency you got emotional instability, you focus, there's a lot of facets of anxiety, anger, hostility, depression, like you said. And when it comes to those 2 things, which is the main 2, how does that correlate to policy making when it comes down to to our politicians that are on the left? What are policies? Like you mentioned ALC in the book. So like what policy, how does this formulate to policy making?
Yeah, so one thing that I will argue is that there are a lot of situations where you need both. Okay, I talked a lot about yin and yang earlier.
Right.
And all one way is no good, so you need a balance. You do need a balance.
Good.
And even the other day when we were working on something, we were being so conscientious on what we were doing that we probably worked on that said thing for 6 hours. It was only supposed to take 30 minutes. And because we were so highly conscientious, we didn't want to give up. And we just kept going and just kept trying to do it.
Right.
When in fact, we had another option we could have taken, but we didn't have somebody who was open to just say, hey guys, we could just do this. It's not exactly what we want, but we'll be able to get the job done. But we were just like, no, we're going to do it.
Right.
We're going to get it done.
No, you're right.
So we are top 1% on conscientiousness. We're in 99th percentile. We're the top 1%. We scored 99 because that's how it goes, conscientiousness. And in some aspects you need other people to work with who are not quite as that, who have other personality traits to add. But I'll say this, not only when it comes to the faction of openness needs to less practicality and more emotionality. So when they done studies, for example, they showed that people who were more left-leaning, since we're talking about left-leaning people, were more emotional, okay, an aspect of openness. And when they did a study specifically on measuring 6 different things, aspects of emotionality, they showed that 6 out of 6 of the studies, people on the left were drastically affected by an emotion-based study of policies where their decision was drastically made based upon their proclivity to be emotional. Meanwhile, the conservatives, the right-leaning person was not. The right-leaning person was able to not make an emotional-based decision, while the left-leaning person was unable to be impartial. So this drastically affects policymaking to where the left-leaning person will have a higher proclivity just to do the empathetic thing instead of the cognitively consistent and already working based idea in a thing that's already at play. So that is a drastic difference on what could happen. So again, I did put in the book specifically that you have to pay attention and be wary about people who are deeply rooted in left-leaning ideology, because they in some way, shape, or form are going to govern policies in that way. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but to do everything policy-wise in an emotional-based way with no cognitively consistent decision-making skills, which by brain scans, which we'll go into later, the heritability through brain scans shown that conservatives like cognitively consistent ideas, behaviors, and ways of thinking, while people on the left like ambiguity, openness, and ideas constantly changing and differentness. So that drastically changes policy, and it can affect drastically, and it has in-depth implications on what can occur as a result of policy styles.
Very good. So with that, like you say, you hit the 5 personality traits, and we talk about how it affects, I know you mentioned how that affects a person's decision making. How does those 2 personality traits, as far as the openness and the neuroticism, when it comes down to these groups, secular groups you talk about in the book, and can you go over the groups that you mentioned in the book and why that it seems on the left there's a lot more of these secular groups formed amongst themselves, even though they're supposed to be all on the same page? It seems like there's a lot of subsets in the ideology, and that there's different vast opinions and support amongst themselves because they have all these secular groups.
If we break it down into groups from a binary aspect, we can really get deep into not into the weeds, but the nitty-gritty. So if we look at young people versus older people, young people are more left-leaning than older people, and older people are more right-leaning. There are quotes to that, right? If you're not a liberal when you're young, you're heartless. And if you're not conservative by the time you're old, you're an idiot, right? Male versus female, which I said earlier, men and women. Women are more left-leaning than men, okay? Men are typically more right-leaning. Men, women, age categories. Religiosity, for example. People who go to church or typically religious people are typically more right-leaning than left-leaning. But we're talking about Christianity and Catholicism, and also Protestants, okay, typically right-leaning. Also, when it comes to race, for example, the least race identity-based group out of the major 4 races are more conservative than the race that has the highest form of identity-based racial implications from a right-left perspective. So, here's an easy aspect to understand this. People who are secular or non-religious, typically at rates of 70 to 80%, are left-leaning. People who are of the LGBT community of some sort and the other factions, typically left-leaning at a rate of 65, 75%. People who are minorities typically are left-leaning at a rate of 90%. It's typically 88 for men, black men, typically 93 for black women. Black women are the most left-leaning demographic out of any of the left-leaning demographics that exists. So people in urban areas are more likely to be left-leaning than people in suburban and rural areas. Okay, so if you have a person, for example, we can do it in 2 factions, we can do it in 3. If you have a person who is secular and lives in an urban area, they're most likely going to be liberal. If you have a young person who lives in an urban area, they're most likely going to be liberal. If you have an atheistic person who is a female of the LGBT community, she's most likely going to be liberal. Okay, because these groups are predominantly left-leaning groups overwhelmingly. Okay, so that gives not only a breakdown from the personality-based traits, but the demographic-based traits that you could, in combination, sum down what is right and what is left. And also, I named 5 different categories which talk about different aspects of left to right. We talked earlier about mental health. When it comes to happiness, for example, psychological health, for example, I talked about left versus right. If we looked at those 5 categories and put them into subcategories to where we have 17 different categories, right? So we have income and education, okay? Income, 5 different brackets, education, 4 different brackets, something like that, okay? Sex, religiosity, and what was the other one? Income, income, education, sex. What is? I can't think right now. I named 4. There are 5. And if you break that up into 17 categories, what they showed is out of the 17 different categories, right-leaning people had higher forms of happiness and psychological mental health than people on the left. You said which one?
Age. Was age one of them?
Yes. So income,
education,
school, sex, religiosity. Yes. All 5 of those.
Gotcha.
So this goes deep. It goes very deep. It goes,
That's a lot of data points.
It's a lot of data points. You can dissect it into race. You can dissect it into many different groups to where the data gets very deep and you can understand it very well.
Yeah, that's, not to go into the whole book, but, it's definitely, even what we talked about, we still only hit a pretty, small amount. I mean, a large amount, but overall not, a few 20, 30% of the book. And there's so much more that this book has to offer. And it's one of those type of books that you read and then you reread and you get more and more each time you read it.
That's why people need to go out and buy this book. They have to go out and buy this book. Okay. This book is it's a manual. It's something that is that of a Christopher Nolan movie. You don't just watch it once. You read it multiple times. It's deep, easy to read, but at the same time, it has a lot of deep concept, and it really helps you understand the left. And specifically the psychological aspects of mental illnesses and different things. And it's psychologically rooted, psychological aspects. It's not all about mental illness or mental health.
Right.
It is rooted in the psychological aspects.
Yes.
That aspect was more of a understanding aspect to give a title that people could understand what you're getting into when you read it, but it hits many, many different factions, as you know. Economics, capitalism, many different references are in this book. I talk about Jordan Peterson is referenced in here, Jonathan Haidt, Candace Owens is mentioned in the book, many different aspects, many different people, and a lot of different data and studies that are done in this book, preeminent.
And there's a lot of good nuggets in there, like you said, outside of the mental illness and just in general. You talked about a scenario where you brought in 3 examples of bricklayers and how we could talk about happiness in a simplistic way. So you got 3 people, and you gave a good example of this. You got 3 people and they're doing the same job, exact same job. But the difference was their whys of why they're doing the job and how that correlates to happiness. And you are saying that, so, it doesn't even, like you said, it doesn't have to be a mental illness issue. It can just be the fact that why you're doing something. Well, the first person you ask, well, why do you lay bricks? What do you do for a living? I just lay bricks. Second person, well, what do you do for a living? Well, I lay bricks to build a wall. And then like the third person is, well, where you live? What do you do for a living? Well, I'm laying bricks to build a cathedral for God, something to that nature. And of course, you're like, well, out of the 3, who do you think is the most happiest? And it's pretty evident that the third person, because they're doing the job and they actually getting more fulfillment. And sometimes, like, it's not even about money. It's not about all these other abstract things, but it's just your purpose. And if you can find that, you can find happiness in a way that it doesn't have to be, high monetary value. It could just be something that means a lot dear to you as an individual.
Yeah.
And you talk about that in the book, and it highlights that. So yes, this book is not just all about just, left people or just mentally ill. And they have all these neurological, mental elements that have negative connotations to them. It's also stuff that, just gives you just some basic concepts to understand that, like, hey, there's also a lot of positivity rooted in the book as well that I've noticed that gives some good groundwork, some good perspectives, perspectives that you could take and use in a lot of different other scenarios, a lot of different other areas of your personal life.
Yeah. And I will add that, how a person interprets it, some of the aspects a person might, because remember, people don't like facts. They don't like data. They might take it as negative, but there are no negative connotations in the book. The book is a lot of what the book is explaining is very impartial views, just talking about data, science, facts, statistics.
Right.
There's nothing that has negative connotation. Information is not negative. Talking about the different factions that people have of mental illness or different things, psychological, cognitive distortions, traumas, related ways of thinking, cognitive errors, cognitive abilities that are different. All of these are good to understand people. We want to understand each other more. We want more information. None of this is negative. This isn't negative at all. Information is good. Understanding is happiness, which I explained in depth. None of this is negative. This is good. Okay? If a person has cancer, would the doctor say, well, I'm not going to give this person the information because it has negative connotation? No.
Right.
The doctor would say, listen, this information may not feel the way you want it to feel, but at the end of the day, I need to give you this information so this information can be used from now on to help you so you can get the treatment you need, so you can understand what's going on. Here's some information to know about what you're dealing with and what the factions are. Nothing is negative about that. Information is power.
Yes, yes.
Knowledge, information is knowledge, knowledge is understanding, and understanding is happiness, preeminently. So
I agree.
so also with what you said when you talked about the bricklayers, which is a pivotal story, because it's like the story of Cain and Abel, which is a very short story, but it's
Right.
very important in its message. And that message is very important, because how can you have three people doing the same exact thing and they all have three different, completely different outlooks on what they're doing? Okay, they're all doing the same thing. They're laying bricks.
Yeah.
And one person asks individually to them, "What are you doing?" One says laying bricks. Okay, the second one says, "I'm building a wall." And the third one says, "I'm building a cathedral to God." Okay, very different outlooks and perspectives. Now, I talked about cognitive distortions. I need to talk about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which gives a lot of understanding into the factions that we're understanding and how it plays in left and right, and mental health in general and outlook in general, which plays into this story that we just talked about. And when it comes to cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, which was coined by Aaron Beck, okay, preeminent psychologist, okay, when he did his work on the factions that is comprised of depression, for example, there's three elements that exist, and you either have one of the three or you have three of the three. Okay, and what exists is you either think negatively about yourself, the world, or a perspective that the future is bleak. Okay. So also within that data, in that faction, is the data that shows, which is understood, that through his work, through Aaron Beck, there's three factions that explain mental health. Okay. And the three factions are that what you think as a person invokes emotion and or feelings. And your emotion and or feelings dictate your behavior. Okay? These are aspects of behavioralism, which is an aspect of psychology. So what you think as a person causes you to have certain emotions and certain feelings. These emotions and feelings dictate your behavior. Okay? So this is why what you think as a person is so important. Okay? What you say as a person is important. Okay? What you say to others is important. What you say to yourself is everything. And what you think is life or death. Okay? Because what you think is a high predecessor of your mental health as an individual. Self-victimization can be rooted to thinking habits. Depression can be rooted specifically as the number one symptom of worthlessness. Worthlessness are bad habits of thought. Okay, demoralization, which we didn't get into, just similar to depression, rooted in specific negative forms of thinking that is correlated with avoidance coping, which is a maladaptive form that people have in which they are unable to cope with the aspects of society. So they lie to themselves. Okay? A lot of people who are psychologically distressed have demoralization, and they are wrongfully diagnosed with depression. Demoralization is a deep faction of people on the left because they have feelings of hopelessness, which we've gone over, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of self-victimization, and this leads to learned hopelessness and a giving up faction. Learned hopelessness is a belief that no matter what I do, I can't get where I want because things are outside of my control.
Right.
Okay, this runs deep. This runs very deep. Okay, and when you look at not only on a deep level, because I get deep into psychology into the book, you see how deeply why this is correlated with statistical phenomenons that we know to be directly correlated with the left, and it drastically correlates together in a web nomologically, in a nomological data set of information. It's preeminent. Wilkes.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to go ahead. Honestly, we're going to go ahead and mix it up a little bit. So obviously you got a book, and where I'm going to be a little bit right now, I'm going to be a devil's advocate.
Yeah.
So now I'm liberal Wilkes right now. I'm liberal Wilkes. I'm looking at your book, and, I'm looking at the title, and I have a deep identity to liberal as my identity. So the first thing I see is mental illness. So now I feel like I'm being called that, I'm being targeted as if I have a mental illness issue. Now, granted, that's not the intent, but we're playing devil's advocate right now. So I read the book. I might read the book. I might not read the book. I might just talk about the title if we not get into the book. So I would say it was just kind of role playing here. First thing I would consider, are you saying that conservatives or rightism people don't have any sort of mental illness? That'll be the first thing you want to combat. Like, well, what about the right? Do they not have mental illness? Do they don't have issues and suffer from different depression, anxiety, and all the other elements that constitute mental illness? Because some people feel like conservatives have high mental illness on their side, on their extreme side, on the far right side that don't align with them. And to get more into it, you can make an argument like this. So hear this out, and I'll see how you respond. If I'm looking at it from, in the book, you talk about communism, which is a far left ideology. And then we look at fascism, fascist. That's considered a right, extreme right ideology. And when you look at the right, and you look at the fascist leaders or dictators, I would say the first one, believe it was Benito Mussolini from Italy, was a fascist leader. Then we obviously Adolf Hitler. And those ideologies, granted, they're rooted in a group with supreme power to where, we're talking about ethnic cleansing, political violence, and basically one group is in control, and there's no opposition of individuals' personal liberties or freedom. It's the one group, the one supreme power makes all the decisions, and there's no ability to make any changes, right? From just simplistic view of being fascist. So if I was a liberal making an argument, and we're talking about far right versus far left, you can make the argument that the far right is the worst of the worst because it doesn't exist anymore. There is no fascist society today. But if you do a Google search, there is 5 countries that still technically are operating under communist ideologies today, which is Laos, Cuba, China, Vietnam, and I can't remember the other one, North Korea. And one of those countries, which happens to be China, is the second largest country in the world, populace-wise. So how could you say one, which these exist? Now we're talking about billions of people here that are operating under a system where it's extreme left. And then now you have extreme right system that was, and didn't last at all, and it doesn't even exist as of today. One could argue and say that, well, then the far right people are the ones that really have the most, those individuals tend to have the most mental or more mentally unstable, and maybe not get into the book. I'm just saying that would be more mental unstable versus communism, which seems to exist today. And in a larger sense, as far as these 5 countries, how would you respond to that sentiment if somebody wanted to draw that distinction of a far right versus a far left? And far right obviously doesn't work, but far left on its face seems to work because 5 countries are currently operating under it.
Yeah. So first, I would say there are some arguments that even fascism is a type of radical left-leaning proclivity, but generally we associate fascism with a extreme right-leaning aspect faction, but and not a left-leaning one. But there are incredibly smart people who actually said that fascism is more of a left-leaning aspect, a little bit different of that of socialism. Dinesh D'Souza has done work on that and others. But just to stay on topic specifically of the argument, I would say, well, first of all, and we'll just talk about depression real quick. The 18% of the population is depressed. 24% of the population of women are depressed, and 11% are men. Depending on what study you read, it comes out to about 18% of the population suffers from depression. When you look at people people who are on the right, the rates of depression and or psychological mental illnesses stay somewhat in that range. When you look at people at the left, that range, even the further you go left, that range gets drastically higher and higher and higher. When you look at, for example, Gen Z, which is one of the furthest left-leaning age demographics out of all the age demographics, we see that on average they have mental health issues at a rate of 45%, give or take, and which is double the normal number for the average adult. And then we see that when it comes to Gen Z, almost 60% of Gen Z girls have said that they have been told by a doctor that they have some type of psychological illness, for example. And then you look at the fact that also to give studies on the worthlessness aspect, almost 60% of Gen Z total, not just women, have felt some type of worthlessness in the society that they can't be and they can't do and they can't get success, and they've had psychological distress. Okay, and 70% of Gen Z feel like they have psychological mental illnesses, and it needs help. They need help, 70% of them. Okay, so overwhelmingly, the data points to not only mental health on the left, but specific demographics of people on the left, overwhelmingly at rates 2 to 3 times higher. Okay, they did studies around COVID, and they did studies around the election. They also showed that they had stress, severe stress at higher rates than people on the right. So it's not just psychological mental health illnesses like anxiety and depression. They saw like even around the election and COVID, Trump and Biden were going for the first presidential round where Biden became president. They showed that 80% of people on the left had very severe stress at the height. The height was only 25% of conservatives at that time. The low of the conservatives during that time was 14%. The low of people on the left at that time was 50%. The depression and anxiety during that time, specifically on what they showed, was 3 to 4x of anxiety and depression on people on the left compared to the right. Okay? And 80% is almost 100%. That's a lot. So they all have some type of psychological distress of some faction. So it's preeminent. It's not even arguable. And I've argued too many points for somebody to even come at that and to even try to give a play. Now I'll say this: the title is the second tier title. It's kind of provocative, but it's not meant to be harm. But it is a talking piece. So the fact that somebody finds it as a talking piece, great. Well, I did my job. But the proclivity is not to say that they all, because I never in the book say all.
No.
But it is overwhelmingly a more left-leaning phenomenon than right-leaning phenomenon. And to compare the historical argument of right-leaning societies versus left-leaning ones on the radical, we can say left-leaning ones exist while radical right-leaning ones don't. Well, the phenomenon of left versus right shows that and I lay this out in the book, that socialism and communism is very attractive, while fascism is not. If you look at, for example, Hitler, for example, or Mussolini, and people on radical left leaning, they've slaughtered people as well. Hitler wanted to get rid of people who he thought were a burden to society so that the society could flourish. Comparing that to a radical left leaning society that believes in socialism or communism rule also leads to some form of death and or poverty and or rights being taken away from people and or stagnation of the government as a problem. Again, all those issues on the right, the problems, versus the left, it's completely different. So the left form of radicalization is more attractive. And we historically continue to revisit attractive utopian perspectives. Meanwhile, radical aspects on the right, for example, are not attractive. And they're not meant to be attractive. Radical leftism is meant to be attractive. It's meant to be utopic. It's meant to be the perspective of day trading, that you can get rich in a day. While it's not the same of that on the right. And I would say anybody who wants to look at the title and go off that alone, and you want to judge a book by its cover and assume, and we know what happens with people when they assume what they look like. I would say this is more than a good or beneficial reason on why you should purchase and read the book. And I'm more than welcome to go on a show of decent size and or value to explain myself to an audience and or any person explaining these things. Wilkes?
Are you assuming, because with the information laid in the book, the typical left-leaning personality traits, certain people that suffer from mental illness, all these things that come into that forms a predominantly more so left-leaning ideology. So these countries that are communist, that are far left, are you saying that in these countries that majority of them have high openness and neuroticism and suffer from more depression than other countries that are not communist? Or is this only a two-party system that it's just America? Just to clear it up, because I can see somebody saying that, well, we got 5 countries, they're communists, they're all left. Are they all have high openness and neuroticism as a people? Or is that not hard? You can't quantify that because it's a one-party system.
Yeah,
you assuming, but are you saying that they're all left? They should have higher levels of depression in these countries than any other country?
Yeah, so they've done these studies cross-lateral to other countries, and some of the studies specifically, there are 2 that I can think of. 2 that I remember specifically, but I don't specifically remember the study, but I know there are 2 of them. If I had time to find it, I could. That the data they found correlated with psychological deficiencies or positivities that were correlated with left and right were done over 9 countries, and the other study was done over 12 countries, and they found no difference. So this is across country-based borders and lines. Also with the heritability aspects and biological aspects of brain scans, so on and so forth. This goes deep, and it goes deep across lines. They've done these studies across lines, and it's the same and it's similar. And while you're playing devil's advocate, I'm also playing devil's advocate to say that a response like that is looking at this, the data and factions that I'm giving are coming from a place of believing that these facts and data are somehow negative. And this data is not negative, nor does it should make you think that people of the left are less than or bad or negative or wash your hands and throw them aside. Because that isn't true. And again,
Right.
like argument I've made, you need both sides, people on the left and the right. I don't believe in a one-party system. That's what communism, that's what socialism is. That's what fascism is. These are one-party systems. So the fact that we interplay with each other, you have a more harmonious circle in the yin and the yang. I'll also say this. The young girl that I talked about earlier, with her mental health issues that she was dealing with, outside of the mental illnesses she had, which is not normal, you would, other than that, when she is on her medication and this and that, and you're interacting with her in a normal way that you interact with other people, okay, she is a person. And she has emotions like everyone else. And when she's not being manic, she is just like everyone else. She's witty with words. You can joke with this young lady. There is a person there. There is an interesting person there. There is a unique person there. And there is a alive person there. And we should embrace the fact that we all are different. That's the real diversity, equity, inclusion. Is to see that you are different. You're fine. You're okay. I'm okay with that. Not, well, you're different. Everybody needs to surmise to your faction or your way, because that is the real diversity, equity, inclusion. We need to force this person into this particular line of work or this degree or this school through these type of policies. No. If certain demographics or races or people don't want to be in certain industries or jobs or this, we shouldn't force them to. Okay? We should accept that they want to do what they want to do. Okay? And we should understand that. Okay? We don't need to push young women to be engineers if they don't want to be engineers.
Right.
We don't need to, and there's unlimited examples I can give on that, which I prefer not to.
Right. So basically, in a nutshell, this is not a book, I gotcha, and then somebody needs to respond back and try to get back at conservatism. It's not one of those, I will read it and like, well, everything you're saying here, I'm going to try to find a ladder to go back at the other side. Because the reason why I even brought it up, because that's typically what people do. Like, oh, okay, you're going to say something that I feel that bothered me. Well, now I'm going to try to come back to you with stats and statistics that try to make the other side feel less than. If that's how you're getting the information, even though you just framed it and say that's not the intent. That's not the intent.
No, it's not the intent.
But unfortunately, you can't get, like you said, when it comes to being subjective, how you make somebody feel is hard to argue with somebody's feel like.
Yes, exactly. It is. And people are going to feel the way they want to feel. They're going to do what they want to do. And I have no control over that.
Right. 100%.
And in the beginning of the book, I talk about who this book is dedicated to. And it's dedicated to my past and future self. My past self for actually doing all the hard work to get to this point. And my future self for basically all the riddance and blessing that's going to come as a result of this, which is people who are just going to want to demonize and create negative connotations or aspects as a result of this, when there is none. It's mostly about left-leaning people, and that's why it's called leftism. But you can't describe left-leaning people without describing right-leaning people as a comparative. So it's both are in the book. You know, people on the right also have mental health issues, just not as high as people on the left. People on the right are less empathetic than people on the left. People on the left are very emotional, very empathetic. And they make decisions with their emotion. People on the right are not as emotional. Okay.
Right.
And they, on a hard right-leaning spectrum, they could probably show signs of extremely low compassion like Mussolini and Hitler did.
Right. So I got a question for you. So in these one-party systems, and like we'll use China because it's the biggest one, over 1.3 billion people. If you have these personality, because personality traits obviously got to be random. You've got a population. We all can't just be one. It's random. It's random in a sense. So there's obviously people in China that have they're conscientious. They have conscientious personality traits and they're extroversion and agreeable or, not agreeable, whatever. And they tend to have personality traits of conservatism or conservative individuals. Would you say in those one-party systems, people that tend to have more conservative personality trait, would they be depressed in these systems? Would they suffer from high levels of depression, even though they don't have depression, according to what you're saying here in America, because it's a two-party system? Now I'm just trying to think just in general, if you do have the personality traits that we talked about in this book, but you live in a one-party system, does that make that individual have a little bit of depression, living in something that's not really aligned with their personality?
Yeah, that's a good question. In a one-party system, it's hard because I'm a data-ridden person and I don't want to dogmatically give an answer as if I know exactly what that would be. But from multicultural aspects of different countries, it's shown that left-leaning proclivities, no matter what country it comes from, have higher forms of depression than people on the right. But I would say in a comparative way, they would be more depressed than people on the right if they believe in that left-leaning style government, if it's a true left-leaning style government, and they have true left-leaning beliefs and proclivities, and they show the same signs of brain scan activity that's correlated with heritability traits, personality-based traits. Yeah, I would say they would have a high percentage chance of having all the nomological things that come with that. 100%, I would say that. But if they are a person who has right-leaning personality traits and right-leaning heritable factions and they happen to be in a left-leaning government and or country that is one-party, I would say, and they don't agree with obviously those policies, I would say that no, they are probably going to have a psychological makeup or psychological health, life satisfaction, subjective well-being, and overall life happiness. Okay, system justifying beliefs on meritocracy, low cognitive errors, cognitive distortions, in a way that would epitomize right-leaning aspects, because that's what they are.
Because the party itself is just one facet, and we're talking about a person with these personality traits. It's like, well, I could live in New York City, but still be conservative and still have my conservative values. It's pretty much you're saying. So if this individual in a one-party system, that's not the end-all be-all. Might not rely with the government's ideologies, but there's probably other aspects in their individual life that they could have control over that might still give them happiness.
Yeah,
overall,
because
just the political part itself, even though that's not aligned with the personality traits.
Yeah, because let me say this. Being left-leaning or being a Democrat doesn't make you mentally ill. That's what a person would have to believe. It's what the data is saying is that people who have psychological distress or all these factions that are on the left, psychological illnesses, and even lower physical health, typically are associated with beliefs that are that of the left. And they typically are left-leaning themselves as a political orientation. It doesn't mean I'm going to choose what political party I want. Oh, because I choose that political party, then I'm now going to have higher forms of mental health issues.
Right.
Yeah, that's not what happens. So what it's saying is that the demographic and the makeup of the type of person that aligns with the different political orientations on either side have specific makeups that correlate, that can be distinguished.
Yeah, I got you. Makes sense. Makes sense. And that's why this has got to be a more of a careful read, open-minded, and not necessarily
It has, yeah,
a
it has to
personal.
be.
You can't look at it as a personal attack, because if you read it, yeah, because you're gonna miss the message. You're gonna miss the whole. You're gonna miss the message. You're gonna miss the whole how you're framing it and presenting it, which I thought it was beautifully done. How you give a history first and bring all the leaders between Fidel Castro and Chavez and giving their whole background, and they dive into the individual aspects, kind of gives a start to finish in a very chronological order to where it's easier to understand. So reading that is just more just like, yeah, there's in anything you mentioned, it's like, yeah, you mentioned even with conservatives at a higher level, we have lower empathy. So there's more apt to use violence in a sense, and not not have any compassion, because of the fact that don't have high openness. You're not going to be a little bit more less emotional, so you'd be more apt if it did come to that point where we got to do what we got to do to get to protect what we really believe in. We might tend people on the far right now. I'm talking about far right, are willing to use extreme violence.
Yeah, I get it. Potentially, yeah. There's proclivities there. Yeah.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, and it's not saying that there's, like you said, there's on the extreme side, because I was just talking about the extreme side. So of course, these are minor, small. These are small. I guess what you would say, like of people that might have these extreme ideals on both sides. And it's not like you're going to get support, but you did break down. I would like to say this: when it comes down to these extreme right ideology, extreme left, you did show a graph in the book where you showed that, okay, when it comes to Republican or conservatives' ideals, they went a subtle more right over the years, where when it comes down to left-leaning ideologies, that ideology over the years have become more left.
Yes, the Overton window. Yeah. It has shifted dramatically, not just from the 80s or early 90s, which that tends to measure that particular statistic and or study, but dramatically, I would say 60s, 70s, 80s in America, it has dramatically shifted. Yeah. But you're right. As you see, as it is, conservatives have in America, when it comes to the Overton window, has slightly shifted more to the right in their political ideology and orientation, while people on the left have dramatically moved further left toward more radicalization. Nowadays, in the particular section of, I think on the first page, when I talk about the section on depression, it specifically says that overwhelmingly, I believe, 80% of Republicans or people on the right do not have positive perspectives of socialism, while approximately 70% or more of people on the left have some form of positive perspectives of socialism, which is, again, a radicalized disposition. And again, I remember many years ago when I was understanding these, which made me want to write the book, because of the drastic differences in ideology, which I saw, which was a conversation I had with a young lady in 2015, I remember, when they had something about Venezuela on the TV, and they were talking about the socialism country of Venezuela and the protests and And, they were having the harsh protests at the time. Remember, because we even went to Venezuela in 2016, that following year, we actually went. You can't go anymore, obviously, but we went there that following year. And that year before, when we were talking about it, she was like, the two young ladies were like, well, what's going on there? It's like, oh, problems in the Socialist Republic of Venezuela are having issues and stuff, and starvation, bad government policies, and poverty and inflation.
Right.
And then her answer was, well, I thought socialism was good. I thought socialism was, everybody has opportunities and everybody has this, everybody has that, and everybody's getting equality. And I said, and then I just kind of smiled and said, well, yeah, that's what everybody thinks socialism is. But historically, socialism has been nothing of that. Not even close.
Yeah. It's funny just mentioning, just thinking about I'm thinking about like Hollywood, for instance, and entertainers that you said are more left leaning in general. And, I'm sure some of them will adopt socialistic ideals and disagree with what you were saying, meritocracy and merit based. But to get to where they are, it is all merit based, because not anybody can be an actor or actress or director, producer, or a pro athlete. And it's funny because everything even though they're left ideals, everything they did is based on you either make the team or you don't.
Yeah.
Not everybody makes the team. Same thing with when it comes down to women say they're not representing of CEOs, or African Americans say they're not representing this, but yet we used a good example of sports. No one bats an eye that says that, well, NBA is 80% African American, or the NFL is 70% African American.
Yeah.
Well, they're all predominantly because no one questions the fact that you're there for your merit. It's not there because of your race. You're there because it is what it is. The market says that competitive edge, you had the competitive edge. No one questions that when the 4x1 team is all four people are African American. Well, those are the ones that won the fastest time. Same thing when it comes to sprints, and same thing when it comes to marathons. They're both African American. Even the sprinters and the slower twitch muscles, which the long distance is still African American. No one questions that at all. And I remember you brought that up. And it's weird to say that you don't like merit-based society when everything about these individuals is competitive. Because that Hollywood is competitive. To get to be a huge superstar in any entertainment aspect is super competitive. But it's weird that it's like you're doing it and you're actually in real time living that and going through these hurdles of competition and trying to get yourself seen, and the hard work that comes with it, to just undermine all that and say, yeah, it's still not fair. It's like, It's hard for me to wrap my mind around those elite individuals that have talent and they had to work hard to get there. None of that is given to anybody.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, it's a great point.
I don't get how they can even still believe what they believe in. Even in reality, it's all hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's many reasons for that. Because it's not just mental illnesses. They have indoctrinated guilt. They have richness, indoctrinated guilt of the industries they're in, Hollywood and university professors and work and education. And they also have an indoctrinated guilt in which they have from their parents. When they studied children, almost 70% of children knew what their parents' politics were when their parents were explicit about their politics. And then about a little over 70% of kids adopted their parents' politics. So a lot of it is I call it indoctrinated guilt. It doesn't have to be that harsh. It could be more subtle than that, because a lot of it happens unconsciousness, and indoctrinated is more of a conscious aspect typically. But but one fundamental and important aspect is a lot of these highly successful people still have a lot of the same beliefs. And one of the beliefs that they have is that how they became successful still was unfair. They still got there by privilege of some sort. They feel like, I'm just got here because I'm privileged in some way, shape, or form. And again, overwhelmingly, people who are left-leaning believe that you only become successful by who you know and privilege, and you don't get there by hard work and intelligence generally. And people are only poor because they had a harder life, and people who are successful had an easier life. And people are poor because they have more obstacles in life, and people are successful because they have less obstacles in life. And they believe a lot of those same things. And people on the left who are highly successful, again, believe that a lot of the reason why they got there is because of some privileged manner. And they feel a lot of guilt by being successful, left-leaning people who are successful. That's why they engage in such these social pandering-based aspects in which they overgive, or we need to, climate issue is the biggest problem and we need to overgive and we need to focus everything on that. And because there's this faction of not wanting to feel internally that they are what they say they are, which is lucky and privileged. So I need to overgive and give back. And, you're right, we need to give back everything because the world is dying and I have to do everything I can. And people shouldn't be focusing on capitalism. They need to be focusing on socialism. Yeah, because they have these deep-rooted left-leaning underlying proclivities that cause them to believe and feel these certain things overwhelmingly.
Yeah, even though
they got there through a merit-based way.
Yeah, it's weird. That's hard for me to even conceptualize that they can't see that, because even when it comes to like taxes, for instance, it's a weird thing to me because yes, left-leaning people are tax the rich, tax the wealthy more and more, higher taxes, right? But even though, when in general, when it comes down to the end of the year, I would say when it comes down to left-leaning people, they're all about getting their tax returns. And they're not talking about people. But there definitely are. It's weird because when it comes to certain things that when it comes to, like you said, leverage, when it comes down to certain things that they feel entitled to, it's like, well, ideology-wise, you shouldn't even be accepting your refund. You should be giving it back. You shouldn't even expect it all, considering what you believe in. But even one guy said it's funny, like you get these high entertainers, these high net worth ones that are hard liberal, but their accountants very conservative. There was always the joke, like, yeah, they might be liberal in some of their ideology, but when it comes to their money, when it comes to a lot of people's money, they don't want the government owning 50% of their company, or when it comes to their paycheck, giving half away their paycheck every single week.
Yeah.
But it's funny, you'll say one thing, but when it comes down to your finances, a lot of people will hire a conservative accountant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Peter Schiff always says, if you pay over 51% in taxes, you don't own your company, the government does.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
You take all the risks, it is risk because we went over the statistics earlier. You are taking the risk because majority of businesses fail. It's a known fact that most businesses fail. More businesses fail all the time than succeed. And for the government to own 51% of something that you inevitably are most likely going to fail. I hate to say it that way, but most people are what it is. They're just going to fail. And you have to make the risk in an investment for something you might not recoup. Yeah. And that's the real thing for a lot of people that I don't understand how a lot of people don't understand that you are taking a risk that you might not ever come back from. I mean, look at the guy what was the guy that jumped off the Golden State Bridge because of his company got bought out for, what was it? Victoria's Secret? Yeah.
He jumped off some bridge. Was it the Golden State? I know he jumped. Yeah, he jumped off the bridge.
I'm just saying it. I don't know if it is the Golden State Bridge. I'm just saying that. I could be wrong.
Right.
But I know he jumped off some bridge. But again, sometimes it's too hard to hack. I mean, like the concept, I guess, of what I'm saying there is like, it's not that he failed. He just made he just made a bad choice in the sense of what happened and how it's cutthroat, because business is cutthroat. I mean, Walmart comes into town, all small businesses go out of business. Walmart don't care. No one cares that these businesses get competitive,
Yeah.
competition, and then they go out of business. No one pays attention to any of that. Anytime a Walmart gets built, pay attention to how many small businesses in the area go out of business once Walmart comes to town. Of
Yeah.
course, me and you know that, but a lot of people don't realize that, like, it's these people, these businesses owners don't got an edge on nobody. If sometimes they're dealing with some tough more aspect than just being an employee.
Yeah.
That their whole lives might, like, for instance, like what your dedication into what you're doing. Imagine doing all this and never getting paid for it for the first 5-6 years. You wouldn't have any employee in the world do a job for 4 or 5 years, no pay. But when it comes to a business owner or a person that's entrepreneurs into entrepreneurship, you're not getting paid for a while.
Hello.
And I
Hello.
don't think a lot of people that are employing, they have this guilt or this negative connotation towards entrepreneurs and business owners and people that are the capitalist people, the elitists, that they don't realize in the beginning, a lot of them didn't make any money.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not,
It-
you didn't
now-
start off at 100K.
Yeah. And, while this narrative of tax the rich and get all resources from the rich and these negative connotations towards the rich and the successful, they're the ones driving the economy. The businesses, the successful people,
Yeah.
they're the ones driving the economy. And people don't understand that. I believe 40% of all taxes paid, of all taxes that go to the government, are paid by the 1%. And the top
Crazy.
20% of people pay 90% of all the taxes. Okay? So this narrative of successful people are not paying their fair share, well, when a person is receiving some type of welfare or government assistance, government assistance, they're receiving it from majorities coming from people of the top upper percentiles.
Yep.
Okay. And also, these fat cat companies and, these fat cat chairmen and CEOs, okay, they pay a fair share. Even if they are able to pay 0% corporate tax in a year, they still pay more than any other entity that exists to the government. Okay.
Right.
When
Right.
it comes to the expenses of a company, okay, 60% of the expenses of a company go to payroll. Okay. Payroll. That is the number one expense of a company. Okay. 60% is payroll. So, even though the government's revenue is 50% of it comes from individual taxes, and I think 33% of it comes from Social Security taxes, or FICA as it's called. And then 7-8% comes from companies directly. If 60% of the expenses of a company is to payroll, okay, that is the companies paying that 50% of the revenue is getting paid by companies through the proxy of an individual. Because you as an individual, when you have a W-2, for example, your pre-taxed income doesn't matter because you never see it. You only get the net. You don't get the gross. Doesn't matter. Okay? And if Social Security tax, which is 33% of the tax revenue that the government receives, comes from what? Individuals.
Individual.
And where does individual income comes from? 60% of it is paid from the companies. You're used as a proxy. The companies are paying everything. Companies are running are where the government gets all their money. They might use individuals as a proxy, but it's coming from the company. Okay?
Yeah, it's
so
hard, yeah.
don't demonize these companies. Don't demonize these successful people. Don't demonize these rich people. Okay?
Until you actually get in the world of trying to make how would we put it? Self-produced income, self-made. Until you try to be self-made, try to make $1 of something that you created or produced, then you can't really have a seat at the table when it comes down to arguing these points. Because it's easy to go to a minimum wage job and just say, I'll flip burgers, make $15 an hour. That's already systemized. It's a system. It's systematized
Yeah.
to where you can get in there and just start working tomorrow.
Yeah.
But try to make minimum wage money as an entrepreneur, even though it's a low number. You think you can hit it. You can't hit it. It's not, you don't just create something like, oh, I'm in business, I'm making 15 an hour. It just doesn't happen that way. And everybody that works in these industries, that's why I have a great respect for business owners, because trying to make just $30,000 residual is crazy.
Yes. Which is a point that I made in the book, right? How great we live in a capitalist society where you can get paid $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, entry level, because of what? Because you have what? What do you give in to the company to where you get 30 or 40 or 50,000? A resume. Because of a resume, you're able to make 30, 40, $50,000. Now you have to do the job. But
right.
You didn't have to create that opportunity yourself.
Oh, that's hard. Great.
Imagine being an entrepreneur where you're creating something out of nothing.
Out of nothing.
Yeah, you don't want that. You don't want that.
Yeah.
Don't demonize that person. But again, this is malevolent behavior. This is malevolent behavior of outward aggression and malevolent behavior towards people who are not in your group. And your group is neurotic. It's typically a neurotic group of neurosis.
And there's a lot of rumination in there.
Correct. Tremendous amounts of rumination.
Yeah. So you're not going to get any really positive perspective out of that, depending on who you're surrounded by. And left-leaning people have overwhelmingly more malevolent behavior than right-leaning people. They're more likely to stop being your friend if they know your politics. Left-leaning person is. If you're right-leaning, they're more likely to stop being your friend. If you have a conservative as your neighbor, and you're left-leaning, you're more likely to stop talking to them or not talk to them. You're more likely to defriend these people online, and you're more likely to act out in a negative aspect and or behavior. And typically, people who are left-leaning have higher forms of disinhibition. This is why we see on the internet, like channels like James Klug, for example, with left-leaning people are being asked basic questions, and they lose their stuff. And they go crazy, and they go basically ape on another person just by being asked a question, a political question. Shout out to James Klug. So James Klug, man. You talk about, your root of the book. I was just thinking, we talk about understanding. And
this is why people need to buy this book. Stop what you're doing. Go out now and buy this book. Leftism,
buy the book.
The Mental Illnesses of the Left.
Let's get it. What was the idea of getting the DNA picture? What was your thought process where you said, I'm going to make this cover and I'm going to go ahead and put basically, let's go ahead into detail this for the audience real quick of what made you decide to use this imagery as your cover.
Yeah. So
why?
Well, I'll get into it briefly, but I do want to save that for
another time,
a longer video, but we will get into it briefly. Yeah. What some people don't know, which is unbeknownst to most, that I do have a high proclivity for openness. So I am a creative type myself. I'm also highly conscientious. I also have extremely low neuroticism, and I'm extroverted and non-agreeable. And my sense of openness and creativity, to write a book like this and to see that aspects of leftism are deeply rooted into the psychological, into the biological, into the neurological, into the cognitive, into the traumatic, which are all internal. And remember, thoughts create emotions and feelings that lead to behaviors, whether they're good or bad behaviors. And I thought deeply about this for a while. And the hammer and sickle, which is the shape of the DNA in the center of the book here, is taken off by a biologist of some sort or somebody. And it's coming strictly off the DNA, which is deeply rooted in the biology. This is biological aspects. And it's really epitomizing what the book is about. These left-leaning aspects are deeply rooted into the biological aspects of the individual. And that's where it comes from. And we have gotten deep into this book, and we won't be able to touch all of it, but we have touched a lot of aspects.
Definitely get a general.
Go out and buy the book. Go out and buy the book and read the book. Okay? More than once. Okay? And that's what people need to do. So I would say, let's ask 1 to 2 more questions for the audience. And we'll leave some room for me to feature on other shows for other podcasters to see if they can dive deep.
Yeah. So like we talk about, in general with like people that feel like, I'm in this position because I didn't have the opportunities or I don't have the same outcome as another individual. So this is why I have, unhappiness. And we talked about in the book, you were talking about the main point is trying to give people understanding, that understanding brings happiness. And when it comes to outcomes in general, one must understand that your life is predicated on the choices you make. And those choices you make pretty much dictate your life. So if you have bad outcomes, it's your fault. First and foremost, 100% your fault. There is no one else's fault besides your own, because no one can force outcomes. All you can do is have opportunities, but no one can just give you a predetermined outcome to something that's in the free market. So I just want to put that out there. But back to practicality and how this correlates with left and right. So we talk about understanding that brings happiness. But when we talk about entrepreneurship, would you agree that to create something from nothing, one must have a deeper understanding of their surroundings, or at least understand the people around them to be able to either create a service or a product that's needed that serves the consumers, and the consumers obviously either, buy your product or use your service or whatever that is. And for you to even create something like that, and it actually goes full circle to where you actually create an economy around it. Would you say that's the highest level of like practical intelligence, as a person that can create a product or service that consumers need and they actually do use it and it does benefit them? That is a higher level of practical intelligence. And then to add in addition to that, that practical intelligence is that more right leaning, traits or left.
Okay, so to come up with an idea of something that can serve people and to go through the trial and error of it going from 0 to 100, which it works, people are buying it, you have sustainability. Okay, that does take practical intelligence because that is the definition of practical intelligence. Okay, and it doesn't mean that people, and we showed there's cognitive differences between people on the left and the right. Okay, so it's hard to say that specifically is a left or right thing. We have to add other factors to make it more direct and specific. But to give an overviewed answer based upon where I think I know directly where you're going explicitly, I would say that practical intelligence is based on more cognitively consistent ideas and a cognitively consistent framework. And I believe a person of a more conservative based proclivity would be able to pull that out more often. But the creative idea obviously would, especially an extremely creative idea, would come more from a left-leaning person overwhelmingly than a right-leaning person. But to systematize something that works and have the conscientiousness to take the trials and tribulations and to go from up to down, to left to right, with that said particular thing is a more right-leaning proclivity. And this is why Jordan Peterson has given the example that, yeah, you need the left-leaning people to create, and you need the right-leaning people to systematize it. And
Yes.
that's how you get these companies to succeed. And that's essentially my answer on that.
That makes sense. No, it makes sense. You know, you got to have, it's almost like if you're a CEO and you're the creative type, you might want to have somebody that's more conscientious to be able to run your company while you could just focus on innovation, but not actually try to run the company with your innovative mindset, because it could be a bad run company. And you might want to, like they said, the whole thing about, I guess, the Google, how they stepped down, the Google uh, CEO, did they stepped down and they had somebody else become like their actual CEO, and to actually run the company from a business standpoint,
Yeah.
while they could just
Yeah,
focus more on the not, more on the
creative.
actual just creative side. It's smart. It's actually smart to understand that before you lose your company, not realize like, all right, I'm not really good at organizing my company in a way that if I had a CEO or CFO or somebody that can just be hired to just get my thoughts and organize it and put it in a systematic way. That is a different skill. And it's almost like Jordan Peterson said, I remember saying, like, sales. It's like people that actually are really good at sales are like some of the smartest people in the world, because it's very difficult to be a good salesperson. And he was saying that even for him, it's good, as smart as he is, he has a hard time selling merch.
Yeah, he did.
It's a difficult thing. And I was like, yeah, I can understand that. It's two different frames of thinking.
It is. It definitely is.
Like a conscientious person might have a hard time going out and just selling to random person, versus a person that's very open and can be creative, might have unique ways to be able to get people's attention to buy the product. And I get it. It's like, you're right. And back to your whole point, the yin and yang, you need all these different personality traits to run a company and not just one. So we're definitely not saying just one, that people that tend to have conscientiousness in this are just, that's the end all be all, and that's all you need to be a success. There is a combination of all these traits comes together cohesively.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. Oh man, we hit a lot of points.
Yeah,
That's gotta be over.
So we hit a lot of points. There's definitely a great episode. There's a lot here for people to listen to. And honestly, this is one of those episodes which which people don't typically do, which they should do, is just like when you buy a book, when you read a book,
Right.
good books, you should read more than once. You should read over and over. They should become catechism. One of the most pivotal books, important books in my life is T. Hart Ecker, the Millionaire Mindset, or Secrets to the Millionaire Mind, something of that nature, T. Hart Ecker. And I read this book maybe at least 6, 7 times before, as I was implementing it. And it was very pivotal in my life. And it gave me the foundation of helping me to become successful. So I noticed that, and Ty Lopez has even said this before, and I think he copied me, which he didn't, but joke I'm making, that when you find something that's important and good and works, especially a book, it should become catechism. You should read it, you should learn it, and if it's incredibly important, you should do that instead of trying to read 50, 100, 150 books. I think that's ridiculous. When you read a book and it's more than just good, read it multiple times, let it become catechism. This podcast episode, when you have certain podcasts that are really pivotal, and I have mine, I go back and listen to them again.
Right.
And again, and again, and again. And then other episodes that are not that pivotal, because they're not all equal, I don't listen to them again. Or I'll take one aspect from it and I'll put it in Appendiflex and come back to it every so often. Okay? That's what you should do. And this is one of those episodes that are going to be deep, that you can come back to and get pivotal information, because it's that deep. So, as I always say, verbal artwork, Mr. Rembrandt, this was a good episode. Wilkes, do you have anything to say here?
No, you pretty much hit it on the head, man. You know, the information we share is purposeful. And like you said, with the catechism, it's like, we're not just doing every episode, we're just talking about a different, like Jeopardy, like you said, information. You don't want to just have frivolous information ahead that really has no purpose, where you just go on a Jeopardy show, you just know all these unusual information.
Arbitrary facts.
Like,
and
like you said, like reading 600 books. And like, I read 600 books. Like, bro, I'm with you. I'd rather have a purpose in life, and I'd rather just have really, really good books. And I have those in there, and I reread those several times, because like the Bruce Lee thing, I don't fear a man that knows 10,000 different kicks. I fear the man that mastered one kick 10,000 times.
Yeah.
And that's more dangerous. And that's what Mr. Rembrandt means when he talks about the catechism. It's like, that's dangerous, but reading, 6,000 different books, you've not mastered none of them. You read a lot, but you mastered nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
No,
so,
yeah.
By the time this episode comes out, the book should be released. If it's not, check back into this episode, and the book will be in the description, in the show notes. The book will be on Amazon first to purchase. It should be, by the time this episode is out, it should be already released. Or follow me on Instagram, Twitter. You can subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the channel. And I want to thank everybody for listening, and whoever who listened. If you listen on Spotify or wherever else you get your podcast, great. Thanks for that too. If you're just watching it here, great. Thanks for that too. And remember, when it comes to verbal artwork, which is the podcast, words paint pictures, and conversation is art. All right? And that concludes this episode. Verbal Artwork, Mr. Rembrandt.